One can forgive one of their children's mistakes and overlook two, but one can never forgive betrayal. Zeynep, my daughter, whom I called my darling, whom I spent my life for, told me such a lie that it shattered not only my heart, but also my entire past and future. Today, I will tell you the story of how a mother's trust in her child was shaken and why I have never forgiven her. Zeynep was my only daughter, my most precious possession in life. I raised her with such love and care that the thought of her one day losing her integrity never even crossed my mind. She had always been a responsible, hard-working, and extremely devoted child. When she graduated from university with honors and started working at a prestigious company, my pride in her was so immense that I bragged about her to all my neighbors. When my late husband left me and Zeynep years ago, we were left utterly alone in this life, and we had clung to each other, vowing that our mother-daughter bond would never be shaken. That's why when she started making those strange phone calls and I sensed she was hiding something from me, I chose to silence that evil voice inside me and convince myself that everything was fine. Instead of my perfect daughter who told me everything, I was suddenly replaced by a stranger who would lock herself in her rooms, speak in whispers, panic-stricken when I approached, and force a smile at me. This change was so sudden and abrupt that at first I wanted to think it was just work stress. There's this thing called motherly feelings, that nagging voice inside you that whispers that something's wrong. My own inner voice, too, screamed at me every night that my daughter was hiding something important from me, that perhaps she was in deep trouble. When she started asking me for large sums of money she would never normally have asked for, a significant portion of my meager savings from my late husband, and tried to explain these sums away with vague, evasive excuses like an urgent investment opportunity or helping a friend, that was the first spark that further fueled the suspicion within me. My son, whose lively, joyful laughter had filled the house, was gone, replaced by a shadow who avoided my gaze at the table, who refused to even touch his favorite dishes, who constantly looked preoccupied and afraid, hunched over as if carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Despite all these obvious warning signs, my blind love for him as a mother and my unwavering trust in my daughter, my sole anchor in life, were so overwhelming that, rejecting the possibility that he might be dishonest or deceptive, I chose to interpret all this strangeness as a temporary crisis and offer my support. This would be the biggest mistake of my life.
That winter, I had a severe bout of pneumonia that left me bedridden. And during those dark days in the hospital, Zeynep never left my side, constantly running around with doctors, exhausting herself to find the best treatment for me. This selflessness made me completely forget her recent eccentricities and renew my faith in her. When the doctors told me my condition remained serious and that I needed urgent, expensive surgery, I saw the helpless look on Zeynep's face and didn't hesitate for a moment to sell the house I'd lived in for years, my only possession, and give her all the money, because I was certain that this money would save my life. when he told me, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll do whatever it takes for this surgery. If necessary, I'll bring in a specialist surgeon from abroad. As long as you get better." I believed the fake tears in his eyes and the false concern in his voice so completely that I unquestioningly entrusted him not only with the deed to my house, but also with my last remaining breath. On the day the surgery was supposedly successful and I was discharged, Zeynep's disappearance under the pretext of an urgent business meeting and the neighbor picking me up from the hospital planted that old seed of doubt in me again. I knew we'd sold the house, that he had the money, and that I was now penniless, but I had no doubt that the money had been spent on my health. The moment I realized I'd been deceived came when I went to my own family doctor for a routine checkup. My doctor's cold, professional explanation that such an expensive, special surgery had never been on my record, that the treatment I was receiving was standard medication, and that the substantial sum of money Zeynep had taken from me had nothing to do with the hospital, was a complete disaster. Believe me, I have no memory of how I left that office, how I walked that long road, and how I arrived in front of that door I called home, which no longer belonged to me. It echoes in my mind. The only thing that remained in my mind was the doctor's words, "You didn't have the surgery," and the sharp pang of betrayal I felt in my heart, unlike any pain I'd ever experienced before. When I walked in, he was looking at me with pure concern, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't left his mother to die and run off with her house and her money. I threw those damned reports in my hand onto the coffee table with such anger that I didn't even recognize my own voice when I shouted, "Zeynep, tell me this doctor who told me you didn't go for that surgery right away is lying." His eyes widened. At first, he tried to deny it, to hide behind absurd excuses like, "You misunderstood, Mom. This is an official record. It was a special operation, a secret." But under my icy gaze, he realized that every new lie he told only deepened his own despair. Finally, when she had nowhere left to run, her strong stance shattered in an instant, and she fell to her knees sobbing, confessing, "That's right. There was no surgery. I tricked you." I felt like the world had stopped for me. When she tearfully explained that she had lost the vast fortune we'd earned by selling the entire house, which was supposed to be my shroud, not to me, but to a con artist she'd met online who had deceived her with the promise of marriage. A con artist she'd never even met? She'd taken all the money and disappeared into thin air? I couldn't decide whether to lament her stupidity or my own involvement in this stupidity.
The horrific words of confession that fell from my daughter's mouth seemed to freeze time and transform me into a soulless statue in the middle of the living room where we sat in a house that no longer belonged to me. I couldn't scream. I couldn't cry. I could only stare at the stranger who sobbed before me and ruined my life. At that moment, I realized that what I had lost wasn't just the bricks and walls my late husband and I had built a lifetime together. It was the unwavering trust I felt for my only child, for whom I would give my life, a trust I could never replace, and all the innocent memories we shared, while he offered pathetic excuses like, "I was so lonely, Mom. He treated me so well that I believed we could start a home." He didn't even realize that in my eyes, his helplessness was merely a testament to his own stupidity and greed, and that there was no excuse for him exploiting my illness as an opportunity. For those minutes, which felt like hours, didn't say a word. I simply waited for the echoes of his disgusting lies to fade in the room. When I finally slowly stood up, I looked into the eyes of my daughter, who was staring at me with that fearful expression, not with love, but with, for the first time in my life, icy hatred. His cry, "Mom, please don't go. Let's talk. We'll find a solution." Ignoring their pleas, I pulled on my coat as if no one else was in that house. And when I stepped out that door, I had irrevocably given up not only on my sold house, but also on the fact that I had a daughter named Zeynep. As I pulled that iron door shut behind me and left my daughter's false cry of "Mom" behind me, every step I took alienated me not only from that house, but also from the neighborhood I'd spent years in. Every familiar corner, every grocery store window now felt like the cruel decorations of a world that no longer belonged to me. The world around me continued its normal course, seemingly oblivious to the apocalypse I was experiencing. I saw people going home, children laughing, and in that moment, I felt deep down in my bones that the most terrible tragedy a mother could suffer was being left alone on the street, betrayed by her child. The price of the life I'd toiled my entire life, the youth I'd spent buying that house for, the life I'd dedicated to the person I called my only child, was that icy park bench I'd taken refuge in at midnight. My despair at that moment was so great that I trembled not from the cold, but from the shame of my profound disappointment. As I saw her name on the phone ringing repeatedly in my bag, I felt the last shreds of motherly compassion within me turn to rage. The thought of how she'd called me, what lies she'd continue to spin, knowing she wouldn't be able to return that money, ripped the last shred of compassion from my heart. That night, on that bench, in the sharpest moment of frost, I made a decision. Since she'd chosen to sell my illness and my motherhood for a con artist, I too would completely tear away the place she held in my life as a child. She had died for me on that bench that night, and I would never forgive this betrayal. As the first cold rays of the sun filtered through the trees, it was as if she were there to confront me with my wretched state, the bitter truth that I, Elif, who had once held my head high and had a proud home, was now a vagabond who had survived the night on that public bench. At that moment, I realized I didn't even have time for pity or tears. I had to survive. My body was both cold and it ached with the chill of betrayal, which ran deeper than that coldness. But my mind was surprisingly clear, and I remembered perhaps the only person in this world I could trust, my old childhood friend Aisha, who lived on the other side of the city and hadn't heard from me in years. After my hesitant knocks on the door, when Aisha opened the door, her face shifting from sleepy confusion to utter shock at seeing me in that distraught state. The wave of shame I felt was so intense that I nearly turned around and ran away into the anonymous darkness of the streets. Perhaps because she saw a story too horrific to tell in those glassy eyes of mine, she didn't ask me many questions. Instead, she silently covered me with a thick blanket, and the steaming hot soup she handed me was a simple act act of kindness that felt so foreign after the monstrous cruelty I'd endured from my own flesh and blood. Sitting in that small, entrusted room, temporarily sheltered from the frost outside, I couldn't escape the doom within me, and I knew that this wasn't the end, but a terrifying new beginning. A beginning for which I would gather my last remaining strength and prepare not for forgiveness, but to ensure Zeynep understood the true cost of destroying a mother. Those few days spent under Aisha's safe roof had helped me recover not only my body, but also my mind, which had shaken off the terrifying numbness of that betrayal. I had stopped crying and begun to think about how I would hold Zeynep accountable for this terrible injustice. When I found among the few belongings I managed to take with me the old yellowed letter my late husband had given me years ago, instructing me, "Only after I'm gone, when you are truly helpless, will you open it," I realized with a painful realization that this was the moment. The letter, which began in my husband's familiar handwriting with, "My dear Elif, if you're reading this, that naughty girl Zeynep has caused you trouble again," was a slap in the face as I realized that even my late father had recognized our daughter's untrustworthy nature long before I did. My husband had enclosed in this letter the key to the bank's safe deposit box, which Zeynep had never known about, opened in my name only, and in which she had deposited a small amount of savings, which she called not your shroud money, but your starting money. This wasn't the fortune Zeynep had stolen from me, but it was enough for a fresh start. At that moment, I realized that this final gift my late husband had left me wasn't just a few pennies. It was also the power I'd been given to resist Zeynep's brutal betrayal and achieve my own justice, and I would use this power to the fullest. As I prepared to forge a new path for myself with my husband's final gift, that being I called my child Zeynep began to face the cold reality of my absence. For the money she'd lost to that con artist wasn't just my savings. It was also the target of the loan sharks he'd left behind. She'd called me countless times, and when she couldn't reach me, she'd return to the house she'd sold. But that house was no longer ours, nor was I, her mother, foolish enough to fall for her fake tears. Those shadowy men who had arrived at her door were demanding the real-life price for her virtual lies. She stood at the door of my friend Aisha, the only place she could think of, and cried out, "Give me my mother. I need to talk to her. It's urgent." I knew full well that her struggles weren't born of regret, but of a need to drag me back into that swamp. Aisha's cries of, "That woman could have died on the streets because of you. How dare you come here now, shameless?" The moment she slammed the door in Zeynep's face, the fortress of, "She's my mother anyway, she'll forgive me," she trusted, was the first moment her motherly compassion collapsed. She no longer had the haven of her motherly compassion. Unaware that I had taken my husband's inheritance from that bank, rented a small, modest room for myself in a boarding house with Aisha's help, and completely disappeared from her path, she still searched for her former powerless, dependent mother. But that mother had long since died on that park bench that night of betrayal. That meager sum inherited from my husband might not have provided me with a fortune to build a new life, but it was enough to allow me to flee miles away from Zeynep's toxic presence to a small coastal town and breathe a sigh of relief where no one knew me. To pay the rent for that boarding house, for the first time in my life, despite my age, I started working in a small tradesman's restaurant. Even though my hands hurt in those detergent-soaked waters, I felt my soul was much purer than it had been in that house full of lies. When I saved up the few pennies I had earned and knocked on a lawyer's door to prove the forgery of the power of attorney Zeynep had obtained when selling that house, taking advantage of my condition in that hospital, or how she had deceived me, I had only one goal: to reclaim my remaining rights from that house. I told the lawyer about that terrible betrayal I had endured, that fake surgery lie, and that fraudulent story. As I recounted her story, the professional anger I saw in her eyes strengthened my belief that I wasn't alone on this path, and that justice, however late, would prevail. My life was no longer about hatred for Zeynep, but about self-respect. Every morning as I went to work, I knew that every step I took, every penny I earned, was part of an honorable struggle to defend my rights, not against my child. That young lawyer must have heard my silent cry, for he saw this case not just as a job, but as an act of women's solidarity. And he scoured every record to expose Zeynep's hospital lie. When the bank statement surfaced showing that Zeynep, after selling that house, transferred the money not for my surgery, but to that fraudster's overseas account, the concrete evidence of betrayal chilled even my lawyer's blood. Meanwhile, the burden of debt on Zeynep's shoulders had multiplied exponentially, and her dreams of a luxurious life had now become a cold, dark, rented room where bailiffs were knocking at her door. In trying to defraud me, she had actually defrauded her own life. When the trial day arrived in that courthouse corridor, when I first met Zeynep's eyes in months, I saw not my proud, disregarding daughter, but a pitiful stranger, shoulders slumped, eyes filled with fear. But this sight did not inspire an iota of compassion in me. While Zeynep's lawyer tried to claim I was mentally unstable, the forged surgery evidence, hospital reports, and fraudulent receipts we presented refuted all those lies one by one and clearly presented the picture of betrayal. When the court ruled that Zeynep had deceived me by exploiting my illness and old age, fraudulently obtained that power of attorney, and sold the house without my consent, that hammering sound was like removing the dagger of betrayal that had been lodged in my heart. The decision was clear. The sale was annulled, and the house returned to me. But Zeynep had no way of recouping the money she'd lost to that fraudster, leaving her in debt not only to me, but to the well-intentioned third parties who had purchased the house. In that courthouse corridor, realizing she had nowhere left to run, she knelt before me. "Mom, please forgive me. I did it, but you don't. I'm your daughter. Don't send me to jail." Her voice was so pitiful that I paused for a moment. But then I remembered the lie in that hospital room, that cold night on the park bench, and how she risked my death to recover the money she'd lost to that fraudster. At that moment, I realized once again that the being on my knees wasn't my daughter, but a selfish stranger simply trying to save her own life. Without a word to her, I withdrew my icy gaze from her, and as I followed my lawyer as he passed me, I knew that the wreckage I'd left behind was no longer my problem. He had to pay the price for his own betrayal. When I put that key in the lock to unlock my own home months later with justice's cold yet satisfying verdict, I felt this house was no longer just a haven filled with memories, but also a monument to the difficult struggle I'd waged. The mess Zeynep left behind in her panicked escape, those empty rooms were silent witnesses to the false happiness once lived here and the terrible betrayal that followed. Even though every corner of the house reminded me of that lie, I now owned it. As I began cleaning that house, every wet cloth I threw at it, every layer of dust I wiped, seemed to clean not only the furniture, but also the dirty stains Zeynep's betrayal had left on my soul. I was determined to make this place my home again. With the help of my friend Aisha, we slowly made that house livable again. I returned to my job at that small restaurant, and with every penny I earned, I bought new furniture for the house. Erasing those last traces of Zeynep gave me indescribable strength. I no longer thought about Zeynep's whereabouts, what she had done to those loan sharks, or the punishment she would receive for that fraud. All that mattered was that I wouldn't have to pay the price for my daughter's stupidity, having fallen into that con man's trap, and that I could live the rest of my life with dignity. While I was rebuilding my own life from those ashes, Zeynep's inevitable end had also come and found her. Because she had defrauded the family who bought that house and couldn't pay her debt to those loan sharks, she found herself on that cold bench in a police station. At that moment, in a final act of desperation, she must have thought of me again because she called my old number countless times. But she didn't realize that, like the phone line I had blocked on that night of betrayal, all those doors of compassion leading to her were now locked forever. The police, chasing the money she'd lost to that internet scammer, discovered that Zeynep wasn't just a victim, but also a criminal by defrauding her mother. When he revealed his partner, there was nowhere left for him to run. When I learned from Aisha through a neighbor that Zeynep had been imprisoned for those fraud and forgery crimes, I felt neither sadness nor joy. I simply thought of how a person could disregard both their mother and their own freedom for the sake of their own greed and stupidity. While she had tried to buy herself a false happiness with the money that should have saved my life, she was now left behind bars, facing long, dark years of paying the price for that terrible choice. It was her choice, not mine.
Months had passed since Zeynep had been imprisoned, and I had buried that painful memory deep within my mind and established my own modish yet peaceful routine, until that prison-stamped envelope landed in my mailbox. The coldness I felt when I picked up that envelope was further intensified by the lines I read when I opened the letter, filled with pleas like, "Mommy, please forgive me." Zeynep wrote of her regret, how she'd fallen for that scammer, and how difficult it was to be without her. She was trying to fall back into her old hurtful lies, telling me, "I'm very sick here, Mom. I have no one. I understand how that man deceived me. I know you tried to save my life with that money. Please come visit me just once." But she'd forgotten something. She'd used my illness as a weapon against me, deceived me with my lie that I need surgery. Now her claiming I'm sick was nothing more than a disgusting repetition of that old lie in my eyes. The moment I finished reading that letter, tore it into tiny pieces without hesitation and threw it in the trash, I knew I'd closed the last door on her. She wasn't a daughter to be forgiven, but simply a painful mistake she had to pay the price for. After I tossed Zeynep's last struggle into that trash can, I returned to my life with such renewed focus that my small job at that restaurant had become not just a way to earn money, but also a therapy that reconnected me with life. I realized I had repaired the damage inflicted on me by my blood relative, thanks to my loyal friend Aisha, with whom I had no blood ties, and the good people at that restaurant. I had learned that family could be built not only with blood, but also with loyalty and honesty. In that empty house, in the vast void left by Zeynep, I began to plant new memories. The colorful geraniums I had planted on the balcony, as if rekindling my fading hopes, drove the gray of that betrayal from my home. My friendship with the young lawyer who had won my case had continued. She had become not just a lawyer to me, but also a young friend I respected and sought advice from, replacing the child figure Zeynep had stolen from me. Now, when I looked in the mirror, I saw not that deceived, helpless street-dwelling woman. I saw a strong woman who had managed to rise from her fallen position, achieved her own justice, and most importantly, maintained her honor despite a child's betrayal.
Many years passed, and when the news of Zeynep's end of her sentence somehow reached me, I no longer held any trace of that old anger or hatred. I went to the sidewalk opposite the prison gate on her release day just to see how that whole story ended. When the doors opened, that woman who stepped out wasn't my proud, beautiful daughter Zeynep. She was a weary woman I didn't recognize, her shoulders slumped, her hair graying, her face bearing the full weight of that betrayal and those years of imprisonment. When she saw me, her eyes shined with hope, like those years ago in the courthouse corridor, and she attempted to take a step toward me, perhaps to say, "Mom." At that moment, we both stood frozen for a moment in the middle of that sidewalk, gripped by the heavy weight of our past. I looked at her. I truly looked. I searched my heart one last time to see if I could forgive her. But when I remembered the lie in that hospital room, the frost on that park bench, and the money that had gone to that con artist, I realized once again that it wasn't my daughter standing there. I said nothing to her, didn't wave, didn't smile. I simply turned and walked slowly back the way I'd come, leaning on my cane. She hadn't been forgiven from me and never would be. As I turned that corner and disappeared, I could imagine how alone she stood before that prison gate. In that moment, in that first moment of her freedom, she realized she was condemned to the greatest loneliness in the world. Perhaps she'd followed those old memories, coming to the street of that house she'd sold and I'd bought back. When she saw my light burning in that window, when I'd built a life without her, she'd realize exactly what she'd lost. She'd thrown her mother out onto the street by believing a con artist's lies, and now, in a twist of fate, she too had been forced to seek refuge on one of those cold park benches with nowhere else to go. Life had treated her the same betrayal I'd endured. He was keeping her alive, Those years behind bars had taught her how valuable a mother's unconditional love was. Not that money, not that false promise of marriage, but she was forced to learn this lesson when she lost that love forever. That night, while I slept in my warm bed with the honor I had preserved thanks to the legacy my late husband left me, she was left alone with her regret on those cold streets where she paid the price for her own betrayal. People often told me, no matter what, he's your child. Forgiveness is greatness. But they could never know how a child can turn their mother's most vulnerable moment, that bed of sickness, into a weapon for their own interests. Forgiveness meant accepting that lie, normalizing that betrayal. If I had forgiven her, I would have betrayed that night I spent shivering on that park bench, the honorable money I earned working at that restaurant, and most importantly, my husband's last remaining trust in me. Zeynep hadn't just stolen my home and my money. She had killed my motherhood, my purest, most unconditional love, and something dead couldn't be resurrected just because the murderer regretted it. My refusal to forgive her stemmed not from anger, but from self-respect. It was my way of defining my own boundaries, of standing tall against the terrible injustice done to me. She could have been my daughter. She could have been my blood. But she lied to me. She endangered my life. And I never forgave her for that day when he tried to destroy me with that lie. That was my painful story. It was the story of how a mother was deceived by her only child, whom she loved more than her life, for whom she had given her life. How she was left to die, and how from that ruin she was reborn alone. When she fell for those false promises of love and handed my life over to a con artist, she lost not only that house for me, but also the soul of that being I called my daughter forever, because the remorse she learned in those prisons pales in comparison to the lesson of survival I learned on that park bench. I told you this story because I wanted you to know that the deepest wounds and most brutal betrayals always come from those we trust most, those we call my dear. And once that wound is opened, it never heals the same way. Forgiveness is a choice, yes, but sometimes not forgiving is also a necessity. It wasn't my anger. It was my final decision to protect my own honor, the disgrace inflicted upon me, and that last legacy of my late husband. He lied to me, and I never forgave him for that day when he tried to destroy me with that lie.